The first crack in the royal fairy tale often begins not with thunder, but with a whisper, a subtle shift that feels inconsequential at first, yet grows into something impossible to ignore. That's exactly what happened the moment Meghan Markle stepped into the role of Duchess of Sussex, and later mother to Archie Harrison. At the time, the world was watching with eager fascination. A biracial American actress had married into one of the oldest monarchies in the world, and her every move was scrutinized under a global microscope. But when Archie was born, the scrutiny turned into speculation, and that speculation has never quite died down. Imagine for a moment being part of a family where every birth, every christening, every detail of lineage is not just a personal milestone, but a matter of national significance. The birth of Archie was not only about Meghan and Harry becoming parents. It was about continuity, bloodlines, and the future of the monarchy. Yet, unlike previous royal births where tradition and transparency were carefully observed, Archie's entry into the world was handled in a way that baffled even seasoned royal watchers. The location was hidden, the timing vague, the public kept at arm's length. No steps of the hospital appearance. No proud parents waving with a swaddled newborn. Instead, there was mystery, followed later by a short, heavily staged photo opportunity that raised more questions than it answered. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And questions they were. Why the secrecy? Why the deviation from centuries of ritual? The palace tried to explain it away as a matter of privacy, but to many, privacy was not enough to justify breaking tradition that served as a reassurance of legitimacy. That was when the whispers began, quiet at first, tucked away in niche corners of the internet. Rumors of surrogacy. Hints that something about Meghan's pregnancy appearances didn't quite add up. Observers noted the way her baby bump seemed to shift unnaturally, how it appeared flat one day and prominent the next. There were those infamous clips of her bending in ways that seemed implausible for a heavily pregnant woman. It might have been dismissed as conspiracy if not for the unusual way the birth itself was concealed. This is where Lady Colin Campbell, known simply as Lady C, enters the story. To some, she is a controversial gossip merchant. To others, she is a truth-teller with the courage to say what others dare not. Aristocratic, sharp-tongued, and unrelenting, Lady C has never been shy about her opinions of Meghan and Harry. But this time, her involvement was more than opinion. This time, she claimed to have something solid, sealed birth records that pointed to the possibility that Meghan was not, in fact, Archie's biological mother. The thought is chilling. For years, Meghan has presented herself not just as a duchess, but as a doting mother, building her public persona around the narrative of maternal devotion. To imagine that image unraveling, to picture the carefully staged family portraits, the speeches, the personal essays about motherhood, all called into question by the whisper of adoption, is to see the potential collapse of everything she has built. And this is not mere gossip over tea. If Lady C's claims are to be believed, they come attached to official documents, sealed by a court, tucked away from public view until someone determined enough forced them into the light. But what would sealed records reveal? Why would they be sealed in the first place? Sealed records are not unusual in cases of adoption or surrogacy, where the identities of birth parents are protected and the adoptive parents are legally recognized. For a royal child, such secrecy would be explosive. A royal birth is not just about family. It's about legitimacy, succession, and trust. The monarchy thrives on the perception that its bloodline is unbroken, its lineage pure. A revelation that the child of the sixth in line to the throne was not biologically connected to his mother would challenge centuries of tradition and cast a shadow over the family's credibility. To understand why this moment matters, we must revisit the context. Meghan and Harry's departure from royal duties was sold as a story of freedom, of breaking away from an oppressive institution. They became global celebrities, signing multi-million-dollar deals with streaming platforms and publishers, trading the palace for Hollywood. Yet throughout this journey, the one consistent element of Meghan's image was her role as a mother. Her interviews often circled back to the difficulties of raising Archie and Lilibet in the spotlight. She spoke of sleepless nights, of maternal instincts, of protecting her children from what she described as the cruelty of the press. If those children are not biologically hers, What does that do to her credibility? How does that reshape the public's understanding of her? The beginning of this saga is not only about what Lady C may or may not have uncovered. It is about the dangerous fragility of image in a world where perception is power. Meghan's every public step has been framed as a battle between her truth and the institution's control. But when someone like Lady C steps forward with claims backed by documents, it changes the playing field. It is no longer Meghan versus the tabloids. It becomes Meghan versus the record. And Harry? His role in this cannot be overlooked. For Harry, family has always been a sensitive subject. He watched his mother, Diana, hounded to her death by paparazzi, and he has spoken at length about how he vowed to protect his own family. If he knew about the alleged adoption or surrogacy, then he has been complicit in presenting a narrative that was not true. If he did not know, then Lady C's revelation would represent not only a public betrayal, but a private devastation. Imagine discovering that the child you believed to be yours was not connected in the way you thought. The emotional fallout would be catastrophic. The middle of this introduction shifts focus from intrigue to consequence. We are not just talking about documents in a sealed file cabinet. We are talking about a story with the potential to shake the foundations of the monarchy itself. Public trust in royals is already fragile, eroded by scandals, divorces, and controversies. The monarchy has survived because it maintains the illusion of continuity and stability. Break that illusion, and what remains? Could Archie's alleged adoption become the thread that unravels the whole tapestry? The public is not blind to inconsistencies. Already, there have been moments that seemed odd. The delayed release of Archie's birth certificate, the strange errors on the document, the rushed christening with no public ceremony. For those inclined to doubt, each piece became part of a larger puzzle, one that Meghan and Harry never seemed willing to solve. Instead, their strategy has been silence. But silence can be deafening, and in the absence of clarity, speculation rushes in to fill the void. And so we arrive at the end of this introduction, not with answers, but with questions, questions that haunt, that echo louder because they are unspoken by those at the center of the storm. Did Meghan Markle carry Archie Harrison? Or is her motherhood a carefully constructed story? Did Lady C truly uncover sealed records? Or is this another chapter in her long career of stirring royal scandal? And perhaps most importantly, what does it mean for a monarchy already battling relevance in the modern world if its newest generation of royals comes attached to a secret that cuts to the core of legitimacy itself? This is not a tale about one woman's motherhood. It is a tale about power, perception, and the lengths to which people will go to preserve an image. The stage is set, the players are in position, and the documents, if they exist, may be the key that unlocks everything. This is where the story begins, and it is only going to get darker, more tangled, and more shocking from here. From the very beginning, Archie Harrison's birth carried an unusual air of secrecy that set it apart from the time-honored traditions of the British monarchy. Royal births are more than just family celebrations. They are national events, moments when the monarchy connects to its people by sharing the joy of new life and the assurance of continuity. For generations, these moments have been marked by rituals, ceremonies, and a certain transparency that reassures the public that all is as it should be. When Prince William and Catherine welcomed their 3 children, the entire world witnessed the classic ritual, the proud parents stepping out of the hospital, radiant and smiling, holding their newborn for the world to see. That iconic image on the hospital steps was more than a photo op. It was a promise, a visual representation of the future of the monarchy. But when it came to Meghan and Harry, the script was rewritten, and the changes immediately raised eyebrows. The world was informed that Meghan had gone into labor, but then the palace issued a confusing correction. She had already delivered the baby earlier in the day. It was a jarring misstep for an institution known for precision and polish. This unusual handling of information fueled speculation that something wasn't being said. Why the discrepancy in timing? Why had the palace not followed its own patterns of announcements and updates? To many, it seemed like a deliberate attempt to obfuscate. The mystery deepened when it was revealed that Meghan had not delivered at the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital, the traditional royal birthing place, but at an undisclosed location. Later reports suggested a private hospital was used, but this detail was never fully confirmed in the open, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. The hospital steps appearance never happened. Instead, Meghan and Harry chose to introduce Archie in a highly staged photo session at Windsor Castle days later. By then, the raw immediacy of birth had been lost, replaced with a sanitized, carefully curated presentation. For many observers, it didn't feel authentic. The palace explained it as a matter of privacy, but critics argued that Meghan and Harry were dismantling traditions that were never about personal preference, but about the transparency of the monarchy itself. At that Windsor appearance, Meghan wore a crisp white dress, her figure already remarkably slim just days after birth. Harry appeared nervous yet protective. The baby was tightly swaddled, his face barely visible. Reporters were kept at a distance, and the event lasted only minutes. Compare this to the glowing, if exhausted, appearances of other royal mothers, and the differences were stark. It wasn't just a break from tradition. It was a break that seemed calculated, raising more questions than it answered. Why was Meghan so eager to avoid the public gaze at such a pivotal moment? Was it simply a rejection of media intrusion, or was it something else entirely? The absence of medical staff and the secrecy around the delivery location led to more speculation. In royal tradition, details of the medical team, including the obstetricians, are typically made public. This is not merely about transparency, but about validating the legitimacy of the birth. When Prince George was born, the names of Catherine's doctors were proudly listed, and they posed for photographs. In Archie's case, the palace released no such details at the time, and when they did, inconsistencies emerged. This fueled whispers that Meghan's pregnancy was unlike any other royal pregnancy, perhaps even staged. There were also subtle but striking details on the official birth certificate, which was released weeks later. At first, the information listed Meghan as Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, under the section for the mother. Later, it was revealed that changes had been made to the document, with her name removed in favor of her title alone. Though the palace dismissed it as administrative, the changes seemed to many like a clumsy attempt to conceal something deeper. Birth certificates are legal documents. Altering them after the fact invites suspicion. For a family under constant scrutiny, this was like pouring fuel on an already smoldering fire. And then came the christening. Traditionally, royal christenings are joyous public occasions, with photographs of the baby surrounded by family and godparents. They serve as proof of continuity and connection. Archie's christening, however, was private and tightly controlled. The public was denied access, and the identities of the godparents were withheld. The photograph that was eventually released was formal, almost sterile, devoid of the warmth and candid joy expected in such a moment. Once again, Harry and Meghan explained their choices as an attempt to protect their child's privacy. But for royal watchers and the wider public, it seemed like another deliberate barrier erected between the institution and the people it represents. The secrecy around Archie's birth and early life had consequences. Where there is mystery, speculation grows. For many, these choices hinted at something being hidden. Why, if everything was normal, were the Sussexes so determined to avoid the rituals that every other royal had endured? Meghan often spoke about her desire to live life on her own terms, free from the constraints of palace tradition. But when it comes to the monarchy, the rules exist for a reason. Transparency reassures the public that the family is living up to its duty. By discarding these traditions, Meghan and Harry created a vacuum, and that vacuum was quickly filled with whispers of surrogacy, adoption, and secrecy. It is important to remember the cultural weight of royal births. They are not private events in the same way that ordinary families experience them. They are moments of national unity, tied to the very survival of the monarchy. When Princess Diana gave birth, she posed with both William and Harry, presenting them proudly to the waiting world. Catherine followed in her footsteps, enduring the same scrutiny, but understanding its necessity. Meghan's rejection of this tradition was not just seen as personal choice. It was viewed as a rejection of the monarchy itself. And within that rejection, critics found room for suspicion. In the days and weeks that followed Archie's birth, the media churned out conflicting reports. Some outlets speculated that Meghan had given birth at Portland Hospital in London, while others suggested the baby was born at home in Frogmore Cottage. The conflicting narratives added to the confusion. The palace never confirmed definitively, allowing speculation to flourish unchecked. For conspiracy theorists, the inconsistencies were proof of a cover-up. For the public, it was simply frustrating and bewildering. This chapter in the story lays the foundation for everything that comes later. The secrecy, the deviations from tradition, the conflicting accounts, all of it built the scaffolding for the rumors that Lady C would later exploit. Without this strange and opaque handling of Archie's birth, perhaps the whispers of surrogacy and adoption would never have taken hold. But because Meghan and Harry chose secrecy over openness, they set in motion a narrative they could never fully control. The royal birth that was meant to be a moment of unity and celebration instead became a source of division and suspicion. For Meghan and Harry, it was the beginning of a story they might never have intended to tell, but could not stop once it began. And for Lady C, it was the fertile ground on which her later revelations about sealed birth records could take root. This was not just a birth, it was the birth of a mystery that would grow, deepen, and eventually lead to the explosive allegations that Archie Harrison may not be Meghan Markle's biological son at all. The moment Archie's birth was announced, the media frenzy was expected. After all, this was the child of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, a baby who represented a new chapter in the royal family. But the frenzy that followed did not only stem from excitement. It was steeped in doubt, suspicion, and whispers that refused to die down. Those whispers began as background noise, often dismissed as idle gossip from corners of the internet, but they grew louder and more persistent with every passing week. What began as speculation about Meghan's pregnancy appearances would evolve into a full-blown narrative. The possibility that Meghan Markle had not carried Archie at all, but that surrogacy or adoption had been used. The earliest whispers emerged during Meghan's public engagements while pregnant. Observers noted details that seemed odd, even if individually they might have been dismissed as trivial. There was the way Meghan's baby bump appeared to shift positions in videos, how one day her stomach seemed small and the next it appeared much larger, almost exaggerated. In one widely circulated clip, Meghan bent down to greet a child, and the bump appeared to fold unnaturally. For those already inclined to distrust her, this was not the movement of a natural pregnancy, but the movement of a prosthetic or padding. Theories began to circulate online, with people analyzing every clip and photo, comparing Meghan's appearance to that of Catherine and other royal mothers. Fueling the speculation was Meghan's own approach to her pregnancy. She was unusually private, refusing to share many details that would normally be public knowledge for a royal birth. She declined to reveal the hospital where she would give birth, and Harry and Meghan announced that they would not pose for photos immediately after the birth. To a public used to transparency in such matters, this secrecy felt suspicious. Privacy was their explanation, but secrecy often leaves room for speculation. Why hide what should be a joyous and straightforward event? If everything were as normal as they claimed, why break so drastically from tradition? The whispers intensified as commentators began to connect the dots between Meghan's Hollywood background and her seemingly scripted approach to pregnancy. Some suggested that she viewed even motherhood as a performance, controlling what the public saw and when they saw it. Critics pointed out how Meghan often seemed overly polished, her appearances perfectly timed and staged, giving the impression that nothing about her pregnancy was natural or spontaneous. The lack of candidness created an atmosphere ripe for rumors, and once rumors take root, they rarely disappear. Social media, with its relentless appetite for scandal and speculation, amplified these whispers. Entire forums dedicated themselves to dissecting Meghan's every move. Some claimed to spot padding lines beneath her dresses. Others scrutinized the way Harry touched her stomach, as if he were careful not to press too firmly. Whether these observations had merit or not was irrelevant. What mattered was the perception. Perception has always been dangerous for royals, for once the public doubts what it sees, even the truth becomes questionable. Adding to the intrigue were reports that Meghan had been exploring unconventional birthing options. Rumors spread that she wanted a home birth at Frogmore Cottage, a choice that would conveniently avoid the scrutiny of hospital staff and photographers. While home births are not unheard of, for someone in Meghan's position, it raised questions about why she would forego the reassurance of medical professionals and the accountability of a hospital. For skeptics, It was yet another sign that something was being hidden, that the royal couple was intent on avoiding the traditions that would normally confirm the authenticity of the birth. The press began picking up on the whispers too, though cautiously. Mainstream outlets tread carefully, often reporting on the rumors without giving them direct endorsement. But the very act of repeating speculation gave it legitimacy. Headlines asked questions rather than made statements. Was Meghan's pregnancy everything it seemed? Was the Duchess planning a home birth to avoid public scrutiny? Why were the Sussexes so secretive about the details of Archie's arrival? In the absence of clear answers, speculation thrived. For those who believed the surrogacy theory, the secrecy around Archie's christening only strengthened their suspicions. The ceremony was closed to the public, with no live images and no access to the event. Godparents' names were withheld, breaking another tradition. The official photographs released afterwards were formal and stiff, with Archie swaddled so tightly that his features were barely visible. Critics argued that the Sussexes were hiding something. Supporters countered that they were simply protecting their child from the intrusive press. Yet the debate itself was damaging. Even if Meghan had carried Archie naturally, the perception that she hadn't became a shadow over her motherhood. It is important to understand how royal traditions function as safeguards. They exist not only to honor the past, but to provide transparency and reassurance to the public. Birth announcements, hospital appearances, christening ceremonies. These are not optional customs, but rituals that anchor the monarchy in legitimacy. By sidestepping them, Meghan and Harry inadvertently created a credibility gap. Into that gap poured endless theories of surrogacy, adoption, and deception. The whispers weren't only about Meghan's bump or her avoidance of tradition. They extended to medical details as well. The palace was slow to confirm the names of doctors involved in Archie's birth, and when names were finally released, they seemed oddly disconnected from the event itself. At times, the palace corrected details it had previously released, further muddying the waters. To a suspicious public, these inconsistencies were not innocent errors, but signs of a larger cover-up. What gave the surrogacy whispers particular traction was the way they tied into Meghan's broader image in the public eye. From the moment she married Harry, Meghan was painted by critics as a woman who manipulated narratives to her advantage. To them, the idea that she would stage a pregnancy was not unthinkable, but perfectly in character. Supporters saw her as a victim of relentless and unfair scrutiny, but detractors saw her as a calculating figure willing to orchestrate an illusion. The surrogacy theory became, in many ways, a reflection of how divided public opinion about Meghan had become. The whispers also extended beyond Meghan to Harry himself. Was Harry complicit in the alleged deception? Or was he, too, unaware of the full truth? Some speculated that Harry was entirely on board with protecting Meghan's narrative, while others suggested he might be a pawn, shielded from the truth for his own emotional protection. Either possibility painted a troubling picture, a royal couple either complicit in a grand lie or fractured by secrets. The intensity of these whispers set the stage for what would later become the bombshell involving Lady C. Without the early speculation, without the constant questions about Meghan's pregnancy, Lady C's alleged discovery of sealed records might have been dismissed more easily. But because the ground was already fertile with doubt, her claims found a ready audience. People were prepared to believe that Meghan had not carried Archie, because the secrecy of those early months had never been explained in a way that satisfied the public. The early whispers of surrogacy, then, were not just idle gossip. They were the foundation of a narrative that continues to shadow Meghan and Harry. By choosing secrecy over tradition, privacy over transparency, the couple set into motion a cycle of speculation that would only intensify with time. For a monarchy that depends on public trust, this was a dangerous gamble. And as history would show, it was a gamble that invited scrutiny far beyond what they might have imagined. The surrogacy whispers became more than rumors. They became part of the public record, a permanent asterisk attached to Archie's birth. And once a question of legitimacy enters the royal bloodstream, it is nearly impossible to remove. What began with a folding bump and a hidden hospital trip would later explode into allegations of sealed records, adoption, and perhaps the greatest scandal of Meghan's life. From the moment Meghan Markle entered the royal family, she made it clear she would do things her way. She was never going to be the silent, dutiful figure that royal tradition seemed to expect. Instead, she positioned herself as someone who valued her own voice, her own privacy, and her own control over how her life was presented to the world. That tendency didn't just apply to interviews or speeches. It extended deeply into how she managed the story of her pregnancy and motherhood. Archie's birth was supposed to be the defining moment that cemented her place in history, but instead, it became a carefully controlled performance that left more questions than answers. Meghan was no stranger to shaping narratives. As an actress, she had lived in a world where image was everything, where perception could make or break a career. By the time she joined the royal family, she had already built a personal brand around humanitarian work, style, and empowerment. But stepping into the royal machine meant entering a realm where narratives were tightly scripted by courtiers, advisors, and centuries-old expectations. Meghan resisted that machine at every turn. Her control over Archie's story was not just about motherhood. It was about redefining her role within an institution that she believed wanted to silence her. That resistance became visible in her pregnancy appearances. Unlike Catherine, who made consistent and traditional appearances during her pregnancies, Meghan's public engagements seemed unpredictable and carefully staged. She often appeared in glamorous outfits designed to highlight her bump, drawing attention to herself as a modern, stylish mother-to-be. But critics noticed something off. The bump sometimes appeared unusually pronounced, other times oddly small. For Meghan, these appearances may have been about controlling the image of a glowing, confident woman embracing motherhood. For skeptics, they became evidence of artifice. Every photograph, every video clip, every angle was scrutinized, not only for fashion but for authenticity. The palace communications team, already struggling to manage Meghan's unconventional approach, seemed at odds with her desire for control. Traditionally, palace press officers release statements, confirm details, and manage expectations with precision. Meghan and Harry, however, often bypassed official channels, choosing to leak details to favored journalists or keep information under wraps entirely. The announcement of Archie's birth itself became a prime example of this. Instead of the expected sequence of announcements, the labor notice, the birth confirmation, the hospital appearance, everything was scrambled. One statement contradicted another. The result was confusion, and in that confusion, Meghan's carefully managed narrative faltered. But for Meghan, this chaos may not have been a mistake at all. To her, controlling the story meant not feeding into the rituals she likely saw as outdated or even dehumanizing. She had spoken before about the pressures of royal life, how every moment felt like a performance for an unkind audience. By breaking with tradition, she may have believed she was asserting independence, refusing to be treated as a prop in the royal spectacle. Yet, in doing so, she created a vacuum. Where she withheld details, speculation filled the space. Where she staged moments, critics saw manipulation. Meghan's narrative may have been crafted to protect herself, but it ended up casting doubt on everything around her. The christening of Archie revealed this control in its most concentrated form. Meghan and Harry made it a private affair, refusing to reveal the names of godparents and limiting media access. For them, it was about protecting their child from the circus of royal coverage. For the public, it looked like another attempt to hide the truth. The official photographs were polished, almost sterile, giving little glimpse of intimacy or joy. Meghan and Harry seemed determined to keep the world at a distance, but in doing so, they allowed critics to claim they were hiding something darker. Another example of Meghan's narrative control came in her interviews and public statements. She often positioned herself as the protector of her children, emphasizing the pain she endured at the hands of the press and the racism she believed infused coverage of her family. These statements resonated with her supporters, who saw a mother shielding her children from harm. But for critics, they reinforced the idea that Meghan was using motherhood as a shield against accountability. By presenting herself as a victim and protector, she deflected attention from the inconsistencies that surrounded Archie's birth and christening. The Netflix documentary and the high-profile interviews added another layer. In these carefully curated productions, Meghan and Harry showed glimpses of their life at home, presenting themselves as loving parents in a serene environment. But the footage was tightly edited, offering no unscripted moments. Viewers were shown only what Meghan and Harry wanted them to see. For her supporters, this was enough to demonstrate authenticity. For her detractors, it was further proof of stage management. The lack of spontaneity reinforced the perception that Meghan's motherhood was as much a performance as her acting career once was. Control also extended into the legal realm. Meghan was fiercely protective of her privacy, launching lawsuits against tabloids that published personal letters and stories she deemed intrusive. Her determination to control her image in the courts mirrored her approach to motherhood in the public eye. The lawsuits were about boundaries, but they also kept the conversation about her private life alive in the headlines. For someone who claimed to want privacy, Meghan seemed unable or unwilling to step away from the spotlight entirely. This contradiction fueled suspicion. If she truly wanted privacy, why did she constantly place herself at the center of carefully staged public narratives? Behind all of this was the tension between Meghan's Hollywood instincts and royal expectations. In Hollywood, controlling the narrative is survival. In the monarchy, transparency is survival. Meghan's attempts to fuse the two worlds left her caught in the middle, pleasing neither fully. Supporters felt her authenticity. Critics saw manipulation. And in the middle of it all was Archie, a child whose earliest days were enveloped not in openness, but in secrecy and suspicion. The heart of this chapter lies in Meghan's paradox. She wanted to control her story, yet that very control undermined her credibility. She wanted privacy, yet she used curated narratives to maintain relevance. She wanted to shield her child, yet by breaking traditions, she drew more attention to him. In trying to write her own script, Meghan inadvertently allowed others to write a more damaging one. The whispers of surrogacy and adoption thrived precisely because Meghan's controlled narrative left gaps large enough for speculation to slip through. This need for control was not born out of malice, but perhaps out of fear. Fear of being consumed by the institution, fear of losing her identity, fear of becoming another silent figure swallowed by the royal machine. But in her battle for autonomy, she underestimated how much the public depends on tradition to feel reassured about the monarchy's continuity. And by breaking with that tradition, she not only drew suspicion but armed her critics with ammunition that would later explode when Lady C made her allegations. The carefully controlled narrative Meghan built was her attempt to survive the storm of royal life. But in the end, it was that very control that invited more storm clouds to gather. The story she tried to tell, of a modern mother, independent and protective, was overshadowed by the story others told, one of secrecy, manipulation, and deception. And once that second story took hold, it proved almost impossible to dislodge. For years, Lady Colin Campbell has been one of the most polarizing voices in the world of royal commentary. She is not simply another biographer or commentator. She is a figure who seems to thrive in controversy, walking the fine line between insider knowledge and outright provocation. To her supporters, Lady C is fearless, a woman unafraid to expose truths that others would rather keep hidden. To her critics, she is an opportunist who feeds on scandal to maintain relevance. Yet, regardless of one's opinion of her, one thing is certain: when Lady C speaks, people listen. Her entry into the saga of Archie's birth took the already swirling rumors of surrogacy and secrecy and propelled them into an entirely new dimension, one where allegations were tied not only to perception and speculation, but to something much more tangible: documents, records, and the claim of evidence. Lady C's credibility is rooted in her aristocratic background and her long history of writing about the royal family. Born into Jamaican aristocracy, she married briefly into British nobility, which gave her the title she still holds. Over the decades, she has written multiple books about the royals, including the first biography of Princess Diana. Her books, often filled with intimate details, have attracted both fascination and scorn. She is a figure who embodies contradiction. Part insider, part outsider, part socialite, part provocateur. She knows how to command attention, and she knows the power of a well-timed revelation. When the whispers of Archie's birth were still lingering in the background, Lady C stepped forward. Unlike anonymous online forums or speculative tabloid headlines, she gave a name, a face, and a voice to the suspicions. She spoke of sealed birth records, of documents that suggested Meghan Markle was not listed as Archie's biological mother. The weight of such a claim cannot be understated. Birth records are legal documents. They are the foundation of identity, legitimacy, and lineage. For a royal child, they are not just a personal detail, but a matter of national and even constitutional significance. Lady C was careful, as she often is. She did not parade the alleged documents openly, nor did she provide detailed specifics that could be easily challenged or disproven. Instead, she implied their existence, hinting that she had seen or had access to information that the public did not. This tactic was deliberate. By withholding the details, she maintained plausible deniability while also fanning the flames of speculation. It is a strategy she has employed many times before, but in this case, the subject matter was so explosive that even the suggestion of sealed records was enough to capture global attention. The context made her claims all the more potent. The secrecy around Archie's birth had already created a climate of doubt. The inconsistencies on the birth certificate, the hidden christening, the refusal to follow tradition. Each of these had left questions lingering in the public mind. Lady C did not need to prove anything conclusively. All she had to do was connect her name and her reputation to the whispers, and suddenly those whispers carried more weight. Her suggestion of sealed records turned what had been speculation into the realm of potential evidence. The difference between rumor and scandal is often the suggestion of proof, and Lady C provided exactly that. What made Lady C's involvement even more striking was the silence from Meghan and Harry. They had, up until that point, managed to dismiss rumors by ignoring them, relying on their supporters to frame criticism as jealousy, racism, or tabloid cruelty. But Lady C was not an anonymous troll or a faceless critic. She was someone with history, connections, and a platform. To ignore her allegations was to allow them to grow unchecked. To address them directly was to give them legitimacy. Meghan and Harry found themselves in a bind, and silence, once again, became their chosen strategy. But silence in this case played into Lady C's hands. By refusing to engage, Meghan and Harry allowed the narrative to spread without challenge. For skeptics, their silence was confirmation. Why, they asked, would Meghan and Harry not sue or demand retractions if Lady C's claims were false? After all, Meghan had been quick to pursue legal action in other instances of media intrusion. Her refusal to do so here seemed, to many, suspicious. Lady C, whether intentionally or not, positioned herself as the voice saying what many already suspected but few dared to articulate. Her public persona also amplified the drama. Lady C's sharp wit, her aristocratic demeanor, and her reputation for fearlessness made her the perfect vessel for such claims. In interviews, she exuded confidence, often mocking those who doubted her. She painted herself as a truth-teller, someone willing to withstand criticism because she believed the public deserved to know. Whether one believed her or not, her confidence made it difficult to dismiss her entirely. Even critics acknowledged that Lady C had a talent for pulling the spotlight onto herself and keeping it there. The broader media landscape was quick to seize on her claims. Tabloids, always hungry for royal scandal, reported her allegations widely. Television pundits debated the implications. Social media exploded with discussions, with hashtags and threads dissecting every word Lady C uttered. For those already skeptical of Meghan, Lady C's words were vindication. For supporters, they were an outrageous smear. Either way, the story spread, and once again, Archie's birth was thrust into the center of public controversy. What makes Lady C's role in this story so crucial is not only her claims, but the way they reshaped the narrative. Before her, whispers of surrogacy remained mostly in the realm of conspiracy theories. After her, those whispers carried the weight of an insider's voice, attached to the suggestion of official documentation. It shifted the conversation from, "Is this possible?" to "What if this is true?" That shift changed everything. At the heart of Lady C's involvement lies the larger question of why she chose to step forward. Was it purely for attention and book sales, as her critics argue? Or did she truly believe she was exposing a deception that mattered to the monarchy and to the public? Perhaps it was a combination of both. Lady C has never been shy about her disdain for Meghan and Harry, and her willingness to position herself as their critic is well documented. But in this case, Her allegations touched a nerve that extended far beyond personal dislike. They struck at the core of royal legitimacy. And that is where the power of her claims lies. The monarchy is built on lineage, on the belief that bloodlines are unbroken and legitimate. If Meghan did not give birth to Archie, if his records are sealed in a way that conceals the truth, then it is not simply a matter of personal privacy. It is a matter of constitutional consequence. Lady C understood this, and she wielded her claims like a weapon. By the time her allegations spread, the damage was done. Even without hard proof, the public imagination had been captured. People questioned, debated, speculated. Meghan's motherhood was no longer just her private identity. It was a contested narrative. And in that contested space, Lady C emerged as both instigator and authority. Her stepping onto the scene was not just another chapter in a long saga of royal gossip. It was a turning point, a moment when whispers transformed into scandal, when speculation gained the weight of alleged evidence, and when Meghan's carefully controlled narrative began to unravel under the weight of doubt. Whether Lady C was telling the truth or not almost became secondary. What mattered was that she had planted the seed, and that seed grew into a story that no amount of silence could erase. When Lady Colin Campbell hinted at the existence of sealed records relating to Archie Harrison's birth, the entire conversation shifted from rumor to something resembling potential evidence. Whispers of surrogacy and adoption had lived in the background of Meghan Markle's motherhood from the very beginning, but whispers can always be dismissed as gossip. Documents, however, birth certificates, court files, sealed records, those carry a different kind of weight. They are concrete, legal, and rooted in systems that exist to establish identity and truth. And that is precisely what made Lady C's alleged discovery so explosive. To understand the gravity of her claim, one must first appreciate what sealed records signify. In most cases, sealed birth records are associated with adoption or surrogacy arrangements. The purpose is to protect the privacy of the child and the parties involved. The biological mother's name is either replaced or hidden, and the adoptive mother's name is listed as the legal guardian. In situations where surrogacy is involved, the surrogate's identity may be obscured, and the intended parents are given legal recognition. For ordinary families, this is a matter of personal privacy. But when the child in question belongs to the royal family, the implications extend far beyond privacy. It becomes a question of legitimacy, succession, and constitutional stability. Lady C's insinuation was clear. Archie's records were sealed because Meghan Markle was not listed as his biological mother. She never needed to show the public a piece of paper. The mere suggestion was enough to ignite speculation. In the court of public opinion, perception is power, and Lady C wielded hers masterfully. The idea of sealed records carried with it the aura of hidden truth, of a secret kept locked away behind legal barriers. If the records were sealed, what were they hiding? And why would Meghan and Harry, who had built so much of their brand on authenticity and openness, allow such secrecy to exist? The palace, predictably, said nothing. They had long maintained a stance of silence when it came to Meghan and Harry's more controversial choices. But silence in the face of Lady C's claim was more dangerous than usual. If there were no sealed records, why not simply say so? If the birth certificate was straightforward, why allow questions to fester? The lack of denial gave her allegation room to grow. It spread from tabloids to mainstream outlets, from online forums to dinner table conversations. Lady C had transformed a rumor into a plausible theory, one with enough credibility to haunt Meghan's public image. The alleged records themselves became a source of endless speculation. What exactly did they show? Did they omit Meghan's name entirely, listing another woman as the biological mother? Did they contain errors that hinted at tampering? Were they sealed at Meghan and Harry's request, or was the court compelled to seal them by higher authority? The absence of answers allowed each question to breed more suspicion. For critics of Meghan, the sealed records were proof of deception. For her supporters, they were an invasion of privacy twisted into something sinister. What made the allegation particularly damaging was how well it aligned with the inconsistencies already surrounding Archie's birth. The delayed announcement, the lack of hospital photos, the altered birth certificate, the secretive christening, all of these details had left the public uneasy. Lady C's suggestion of sealed records acted as the missing piece of the puzzle, tying together loose ends in a way that made sense to those who had always doubted Meghan. Even if unproven, it felt like an answer, and in scandal, sometimes feeling is enough. The timing of Lady C's revelation also played into its impact. By the time she raised the issue of sealed records, Meghan and Harry had already alienated much of the British press. They had moved abroad, stepping away from their royal duties and painting themselves as victims of the institution. In that climate, many in the media were eager for anything that could challenge the Sussexes' carefully curated image. Lady C's claim was irresistible, a weapon that could pierce through the glossy veneer of Meghan's narrative. It was reported, repeated, debated, and dissected endlessly. There is also the matter of why such records, if they exist, would have been sealed in the first place. In most jurisdictions, sealing is not automatic. It must be requested or ordered. This raises further questions. Who made the request, and why? Was it Meghan and Harry seeking privacy, or was it the palace attempting to protect the monarchy from scandal? Each possibility carries its own implications. If Meghan and Harry initiated the sealing, it suggests they were complicit in hiding the truth. If the palace intervened, it implies that the institution itself was willing to cover up in order to protect its image. Either scenario deepens the sense of deception. The alleged sealed records also struck a nerve because they touched on one of the monarchy's most sacred principles, bloodline. The entire foundation of royal legitimacy rests on the belief that succession passes through an unbroken biological chain. Adoption does not carry the same weight in the eyes of monarchy and tradition. If Archie were adopted, his place in the line of succession would be constitutionally questionable. This is not merely gossip. It is a matter that could destabilize the very concept of royal continuity. Lady C understood this, and her insinuation carried that weight into every conversation it sparked. From a psychological perspective, the existence of sealed records represented betrayal. Meghan had spent years presenting herself as a devoted mother, speaking of sleepless nights, maternal instincts, and the challenges of raising children under media scrutiny. If those children were not biologically hers, then everything she had said was called into question. Was she acting a role, as critics often accused? Was her motherhood another carefully staged performance, crafted for public sympathy and brand building? These were the uncomfortable questions that Lady C's claims forced into the open. For Harry, too, the implications were devastating. If sealed records existed that contradicted Meghan's narrative, then his role as a father was also thrown into doubt. Was he aware of the truth, standing by Meghan in a deception, or had he himself been misled? Either answer cast him in a painful light, either complicit or betrayed. For a man whose entire life had been defined by the trauma of losing his mother and mistrusting the press, this was a cruel twist of fate. The sealed records, real or not, became a weapon that cut into his identity as both husband and father. Critics of Lady C argue that her failure to produce the actual records undermines her credibility. But in the world of royal scandal, producing evidence is not always necessary. The suggestion alone is enough to keep the story alive. In fact, withholding proof allows the allegation to live longer because the lack of closure means people continue to speculate. Lady C knows this. By refusing to show her hand fully, she keeps the story burning, ensuring that Meghan remains under suspicion. It is a tactic as old as scandal itself. Imply, withhold, and let the imagination do the rest. And so, the alleged sealed records remain a ghost at the heart of Archie's story. Never seen, never confirmed, but always haunting. They represent the gap between truth and perception, between what Meghan and Harry present and what people suspect. In that gap lies the power of Lady C's intervention. She did not need to prove her case conclusively. She only needed to plant the idea that such proof existed, locked away where the public could not see it. Whether the records exist or not may never be definitively known. What matters is that the mere suggestion of them reshaped the narrative of Archie's birth. From this point forward, Meghan's motherhood was no longer accepted at face value. Every photograph of her with Archie, every anecdote about sleepless nights, every carefully staged interview carried with it the shadow of suspicion. And once suspicion takes root, it is almost impossible to erase. The moment Lady C's allegations about sealed birth records began to circulate, the reaction was immediate and ferocious. What had previously lived in the murky shadows of internet forums and speculative gossip columns suddenly had a sharp edge of credibility. A woman with aristocratic ties, a history of publishing books about the royals, and a reputation for fearlessness was now at the center of the storm. For the public, it was both shocking and strangely inevitable. The secrecy around Archie's birth had always felt unusual, and now someone was suggesting there was a concrete reason for it. The whispers became front-page headlines, and the frenzy took on a life of its own. News outlets around the world pounced on the story. Tabloids splashed sensational covers. Was Meghan ever pregnant? Lady C's shocking claim. Archie not her son. Though many of these publications couched their words in speculation rather than outright declarations, the damage was the same. Once the idea was in print, it spread like wildfire. Television talk shows debated it endlessly, with royal commentators, journalists, and self-styled experts weighing in on every possible angle. The adoption theory was no longer just a rumor whispered among skeptics. It had become a mainstream conversation. The public reaction was divided, and the divisions were fierce. On one side were Meghan's supporters, who dismissed Lady C's claims as cruel fabrications, designed to humiliate a woman who had already endured relentless scrutiny. For them, the sealed records allegation was simply the latest attack on Meghan, another example of the misogyny and racism they believed underpinned much of the criticism she faced. Hashtags in her defense began trending, with loyal fans vowing to protect her reputation from what they saw as baseless slander. On the other side were those who felt vindicated. For years they had suspected that something about Meghan's pregnancy did not add up, and now they had a voice of authority confirming their suspicions. Online forums erupted with posts claiming that they had been right all along. They dissected old photographs, videos, and press clippings with renewed fervor, pointing to every supposed inconsistency as proof of Lady C's claim. In their minds, Meghan's secrecy had always suggested deception, and now they finally had a reason to believe it was true. Social media platforms became battlegrounds. Supporters and critics of Meghan clashed in endless arguments, each side presenting their version of the truth. Viral posts claimed to break down footage of Meghan walking with her baby bump, while others defended her as the victim of a smear campaign. The debate was not just about Archie's birth. It was about trust, identity, and the credibility of the Sussexes as a whole. Every new comment from a commentator or public figure added fuel to the fire. For mainstream media, the story was irresistible. It combined everything that guarantees attention: royalty, scandal, secrecy, and a potential constitutional crisis. Producers and editors knew that any headline connecting Meghan Markle to adoption or deception would draw massive clicks and ratings. And so, even outlets that were cautious in tone still gave the story oxygen by covering it, often with a veneer of balance. Lady C claims X, Sussexes stay silent. But in the age of modern media, balance often does little to stop the narrative from snowballing. The frenzy was not confined to Britain. American outlets covered the story too, though often with a different tone. In the U.S., Meghan and Harry had cultivated a sympathetic audience, presenting themselves as victims of a cold and hostile institution. American networks were more likely to frame Lady C's claims as another example of the British establishment targeting Meghan unfairly. Yet, even sympathetic coverage could not ignore the implications. If there were sealed records, what did they contain? If Lady C's allegations were true, what did that mean for the Sussexes' carefully crafted narrative? In the middle of all this was the palace, watching as the storm gathered force. The monarchy itself stayed silent, as it always does during scandals of this nature. But commentators noted how the palace's refusal to issue even a minimal statement gave the impression of quiet acknowledgement. Silence is often interpreted as complicity, and in this case, it allowed speculation to grow unchecked. If the palace had issued a denial, perhaps the frenzy might have slowed. But by refusing to say anything at all, they left the field wide open for Lady C's claims to dominate. The shock was not only about the possibility that Meghan had not given birth to Archie. It was also about what this meant for the public's relationship with the monarchy. For centuries, royal births had been moments of unity, symbols of continuity that reassured the nation. To learn, or even to suspect, that one of those births had been hidden behind sealed records was a betrayal. It suggested that the monarchy was not as transparent as it pretended to be, that it was willing to mislead the public when it suited its interests. For a monarchy already grappling with declining relevance, this was a dangerous perception to allow. The frenzy also had personal consequences. Meghan's image as a mother was at the heart of her public identity. She had spoken often about her children, using her role as a mother to connect with audiences on a human level. Lady C's allegation threatened to unravel that carefully cultivated image. If Meghan had not given birth to Archie, then her stories of sleepless nights, maternal instincts, and protective love took on a different tone. Was she telling the truth? Or was she, as critics claimed, performing a role for the cameras? Harry's position was equally precarious. The public began to question not just Meghan's role, but his. If the adoption theory was true, did Harry know? Was he complicit in presenting a false narrative to the world, or had he been deceived himself? Neither possibility was flattering. Either he was part of a grand deception, or he was the victim of one. For a man who had built his adult life on the desire to protect his family from the trauma of his own childhood, this was a devastating line of speculation. The frenzy reached a peak when television specials and podcasts began dedicating entire episodes to the scandal. Some framed it as investigative journalism, attempting to trace inconsistencies in the official record. Others leaned into the sensationalism, treating it as entertainment. The result was the same. The public could not escape the story. Every newsstand, every social media feed, every dinner table seemed to circle back to the same question. Was Archie really Meghan's biological son? The shock, then, was not confined to the allegations themselves, but to the way they reverberated through every corner of public discourse. It became impossible to separate Meghan's motherhood from Lady C's claims. Even those who defended Meghan did so by engaging with the allegation, thereby giving it more visibility. In this way, Lady C had achieved something extraordinary. She had turned a whisper into a global conversation, one that Meghan and Harry could not silence, no matter how carefully they tried to control their narrative. The media frenzy was not a temporary storm. It was the beginning of a long, drawn-out struggle over perception, truth, and credibility. For Meghan and Harry, it was another battle in their ongoing war with the press and public opinion. For the monarchy, it was a reminder that secrecy in the modern world is almost always a losing strategy. And for Lady C, it was a triumph of influence, proving once again her ability to dominate the conversation and shape the narrative. When Lady C's allegations about sealed records began to dominate headlines, the spotlight inevitably turned to Prince Harry. For Meghan, criticism was nothing new. She had been at the center of controversy from the moment her relationship with Harry became public. But for Harry, this was different. He was not only a husband defending his wife, but also a father whose child's legitimacy was being publicly questioned. This placed him in an impossible position, one that cut at the very core of his identity. He had to choose between defending Meghan unconditionally, protecting Archie's legacy, or addressing the allegations in a way that risked confirming the suspicions he so desperately wanted to silence. Harry's life has always been defined by trauma. The loss of his mother, Princess Diana, in such brutal and public circumstances shaped everything about the man he became. From his earliest years, he witnessed the cruelty of media intrusion, the relentless scrutiny of his family, and the devastating consequences of living life in the spotlight. His mission, he often said, was to protect his own family from that same fate. Yet here he was, facing speculation about his son's very existence, speculation that could not be stopped by silence or by the legal threats that Meghan favored. The dilemma was not just about public relations. It was about his deepest fears resurfacing in the harshest possible way. For Harry, the allegations carried layers of personal pain. If Meghan had not carried Archie, and if adoption or surrogacy had been concealed, then Harry had participated, willingly or unwillingly, in presenting a false narrative to the world. If he knew, then critics would see him as complicit in a deception that undermined royal legitimacy. If he did not know, then the betrayal was even worse. It would mean that the woman he had left his family and country for had hidden from him the most intimate truth about their child. Neither outcome was one he could easily face. His dilemma, therefore, was not only about what to say publicly but also about what to confront privately. The weight of fatherhood made this even more difficult. Harry had often spoken of his determination to give his children a life free from the burdens he had endured. In interviews, he described Archie's laughter, his milestones, and the joy of watching him grow. For critics, Lady C's allegations made those moments feel hollow, as though Harry were speaking lines from a script rather than living authentic experiences. For Harry himself, the allegations threatened to rob him of the one thing he valued most: his credibility as a father. Even if the allegations were false, their existence meant that his role as Archie's protector was compromised. How could he shield his child from trauma when the world was openly questioning whether that child was truly his? Publicly, Harry maintained silence. This was consistent with the palace's traditional strategy of never dignifying rumors with a response. But Harry was no longer fully bound by palace rules. He and Meghan had stepped back from royal duties, freeing themselves from institutional constraints. That meant the silence was not forced, it was chosen. And that choice was costly. For every day that Harry did not speak, speculation grew louder. His refusal to defend Meghan and Archie in direct terms was interpreted by critics as a tacit acknowledgement that something was wrong. Why, they asked, would Harry not issue a clear and simple denial if the allegations were false? Privately, the situation was even more fraught. Reports from insiders suggested that Harry was torn between rage and despair. Rage at the media for once again turning his personal life into a spectacle. Rage at Lady C for daring to make such an accusation about his family. But beneath the anger was fear. Fear that the allegations could not be erased. Fear that even false rumors would shape the way his children were seen for the rest of their lives. He had grown up under the shadow of speculation about his own parentage, with endless comparisons between himself and James Hewitt fueling rumors that he was not Charles's son. He knew firsthand how damaging such whispers could be. Now, he faced the horrifying reality that his son was destined to endure the same. The parallels to his own life made Harry's dilemma even more poignant. For decades, he had lived with questions about his identity, questions he could never fully escape despite repeated denials from his mother and others close to her. The rumors about Archie felt like history repeating itself, a generational curse that he had hoped to break, but instead found himself passing on. In interviews, Harry had often expressed his desire to protect his children from the same hell he went through. Yet Lady C's claims made it clear that Archie would grow up under the same cloud of suspicion that had haunted Harry himself. The dilemma extended to Harry's relationship with Meghan. If he publicly defended her, he risked amplifying the story and giving it legitimacy. If he remained silent, he left her exposed to relentless criticism. If he pressed her privately for answers, it could fracture their marriage. The bond between them, forged in the fires of media hostility, was now tested by something far more personal. For a man who had given up his royal life to stand by his wife, the thought of doubting her was almost unbearable. Yet the rumors, once spoken aloud by Lady C, could not be unheard. Adding to the complexity was Harry's relationship with his family back in Britain. His father, King Charles, and his brother, Prince William, had remained silent, refusing to engage in public with the allegations. But silence is not neutrality. Behind closed doors, what were they saying? Did they believe the rumors? Did they see Harry as complicit, or did they pity him as a victim of Meghan's alleged deception? Harry's isolation from his family only made the dilemma worse. If he sought their support, he risked humiliation. If he rejected them entirely, he confirmed the narrative of division. For the media, Harry's silence became part of the story. Headlines questioned why he had not spoken, why he had not issued a denial, why he had not sued Lady C for defamation. Legal experts pointed out that Harry and Meghan had previously been litigious, pursuing lawsuits against tabloids and photographers. Why, then, were they not taking action in this case? The absence of legal retaliation became another piece of circumstantial evidence in the public mind. If the allegations were false, wouldn't they fight harder to clear their names? The dilemma reached its peak when commentators began to speculate about Harry's mental health. He had often spoken of the toll that media intrusion had taken on him, how therapy and support had helped him cope. Now, the relentless focus on his son's legitimacy risked undoing that progress. Some suggested that Harry looked strained in recent appearances, his smile tighter, his words less assured. The man who had once seemed liberated by his departure from the monarchy now appeared haunted by the weight of suspicion. At its heart, Harry's dilemma was about truth. What was the truth about Archie's birth? Was it the story Meghan and Harry had told the world, or was it the version implied by Lady C's allegations? The cruel reality is that in the absence of proof, perception often becomes truth. And for Harry, the perception was devastating. He was either the defender of a wife accused of deception or the victim of a deception too intimate to bear. Neither option offered peace. The tragedy of Harry's dilemma is that it echoed the very cycle he had hoped to escape. He had left the royal family to protect his own, to create a life free from the shadows of suspicion and intrusion. Yet in doing so, he found himself caught in an even more brutal spotlight, one that questioned not only his choices, but his very identity as a husband and father. Lady C's allegations did not simply challenge Meghan. They challenged Harry's entire sense of self.